Welcome to the All Metal Mode podcast with your host, Michael Hare. Tune in every Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern with co-host Gypsy Jules, and every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern with Matt Hoffman as we talk to guests, discuss metal detectors, equipment, and everything treasure related. Feel free to join in the discussion in the chat room during the show, and please, if you like what you hear, we'd appreciate you taking a moment, hit that like button, and share the link with your friends. We hope you enjoy the show. The All Metal Mode podcast starts right now.
Hello, everybody. This is Mike here, and you're listening to the All Metal Mode podcast. Of course, tonight, my very special co-host is Mr. Dorian Cook. Don't forget, you can find us on Facebook at All Metal Mode, as well as All Metal Mode Podcast UK. All Metal Mode is every Monday and Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And All Metal Mode UK is every Thursday at 8 p.m. GMT time or 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please tell your friends about us. We'd appreciate it. Anybody you know that's into metal detecting. You can listen to the show live, of course, like you are right now. If you're tuning in right now, you can join us in chat. At the bottom when you're listening to the show, there's a bar that pops up with the pause button. Click on that. There's a chat bubble. You can sign in right through your Facebook. It only takes a second. You can join us in chat. We always have some great conversations going on in chat, of course. You can listen anytime from Spreaker. You can download from Spreaker and listen on the go. iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube. There's just so many different ways you can tune in. Dirt Digest magazines, the September issue is out. It's a free online magazine. Check us out at dirtdigestmagazine.com. Keep in mind, we're always looking for articles. If you have an article, you can go out there to dirtdigestmagazine.com. We have a place where you can submit articles if you have questions or anything, you can reach out to me. I can help you. Every month we do finds. If you got any good finds, please submit them. And I want to say, I get a question a lot, and one of the questions I get most often about this is, does it have to be found this month? And my answer is no. If it's been months or something, maybe let us know. But I'll tell you, if you know I would like to see finds, your best finds from long ago, or something that you really like that you found. It doesn't matter. I would like, if you do that, please tell me roughly when it was found, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I would love to get some of these guys like Dorian Cook and the people, and We Dig the Civil War group. I'm trying to think of the second half of We Dig Civil War.
Headquarters.
What's that, Dorian?
Headquarters.
We Dig the Civil War headquarters. I'd love to get some of them old wise men that have been doing it for a lot of years to post some of their finds from years back. Just keep in mind, if it has been a long time, please tell us how long it's been. As you know, last week we started a new Facebook group, and it's Dirty Letters, All Metal Mode. And before y'all freak out, you got to remember it's Dirty Letters because we're all diggers. And actually, one of our great listeners suggested that. That was Katie Yeary. And so how we got into that is this. The group is about, if you want a pen pal, join the group. The conversation came up with Amanda last week, and she's got pen pals and actually writes letters. And she was talking about how she finds old pictures and old postcards and stuff like that. And we got into this big conversation. Well, here our good listener, Katie, does too. So we decided to start the group, and we're going to do that. I was talking with Katie. Well, Jeff was making fun of me, Jeff Yeary, and Katie said that she would make sure that he sent me an apology letter. So I've been going out to the mail every day. I haven't seen my apology letter yet, and I was talking to Katie and Amanda about it later in a group message, and they were trying to reassure me that, don't let Jeff get under your skin. He's a big meanie head, that kind of stuff. And one of them said, the founding fathers wrote letters, and that made me feel less feminine for a minute, I guess you could say. And then it dawned on me, oh, you mean the founding fathers that wore makeup and wigs? So then it wasn't so much. I didn't feel so manly still then. One last thing before I turn it over, a few things. Tonight we're going to talk treasure signs. Mr. Keith Wills is joining us, and you're probably not going to hear a lot from me tonight. This is not a subject I know much of anything about, so I will be in chat here very shortly, and I'll monitor from the chat. But one thing I do want to say, and I hope this doesn't come across too harsh. I from time to time I will get emails, messages, different things about I don't like this person on the podcast or that person, or Mike, you need to do this, you need to do that. I don't like how you do this. And I'm going to be really honest with you. I enjoy criticism. I enjoy suggestions, and I don't mind people's input. But when I get somebody posting in the All Metal Mode group and it's very rude and nasty, it won't be tolerated. And what I want to say is this. Myself and everybody else who does this podcast with me put in a lot of time, a lot of work. I'll be honest with you, if you want to criticize and you want to be rude and stuff, I really don't care. Keep it to yourself. Go tell somebody else, because I really don't care. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sick of it, to be honest with you. Again, if you have suggestions for the podcast, if you, if there's an audio issue I'm not aware of, there's different things, I'm okay with that. But when you're just being rude, and I don't care. I just keep it to yourself. Tell somebody else, look, there's other metal detecting podcasts. Go listen to them. There's plenty of different ways to get information on this hobby. I just really don't care. And I'm really trying to be as nice as I can, but sometimes it's really frustrating when you and your team work your butts off and you dedicate time because we like sharing, we want to help educate, we want to learn together, and we sacrifice time from work, family, everything else, and then there's people that are just rude and nasty about it. And I really don't want you listening to the show anyhow, I'll be honest with you. We don't need those kind of listeners. And I want to make it clear, we don't make any money. This comes out of my pocket every single month. And I also, while I'm at it, I want to say I have turned down sponsors. Matter of fact, 3 times. The reason I have turned down sponsors is I don't want to give up what the show is. And so it still comes out of my pocket. And so we can say what we want. We can talk about whatever detectors we want. We can be honest about our feelings about different detectors and stuff. And that's why I do it. But the negative people, just go listen to another podcast. I don't want to hear it. I'm going to stop there before it gets out of hand because it's really infuriating. I've had enough of it. So keep it to yourself, or I don't care. Go listen somewhere else. Go do something else. Don't care. Dorian, how are you tonight?
Doing good, Mike.
Good. I'm glad. I hope that wasn't too much.
Well, we would like everybody to like us. All of us would, but we've been down life's road far enough to know that sometimes personalities clash. People don't like certain people for whatever reasons, and it comes down to this: if you or me or Gypsy or Matt or whatever, offend someone in a certain way and they don't bring it to us, it's impossible for us to fix it or make any attempt or offer a sincere apology. We're kind of at a loss there. So, the right thing to do is to confront the person that you're having issues with and let them know what those issues are and give them a chance to fix it.
Right. And I don't have a problem with that. It's, it's just some of these people are out of control. And I just, they come about it, they go about it in a very rude, disrespectful way. And that's not going to get you anywhere with me. I give up too much of my personal time because I love doing this. Again, we don't have sponsor. We've turned them down so we can stay true to who we are and what we believe in. This is coming out of my pocket each and every month. And so before you come at me disrespectful, you might want to think about that because I'm going to stop being nice about it. I really am. I don't care. Don't listen. We don't care about the numbers. We don't care who's listening, why they're listening. If you enjoy it, that's great, and we love that. If you got an issue or problem, reach out to us. Be more than happy to work on stuff with you. But if you're going to reach out to us in an ugly, disrespectful way, it's not going to get you anywhere. Let's move past that, Dorian. I'm sorry. I'll just dwell on it because it's just been eating at me this week. I've had just my fill of it. Absolutely my fill of it.
Okay. All right.
Dorian said okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you ready to get into it then?
You jump right in there again. If I'll be here, but I'm going to jump in chat and mess with these guys, and I'll be listening. It's just not my subject. I just don't have much to add to it, Dorian.
Okay,
excited to hear it though. Excited.
I think Keith and I can shed some light on this subject and bring out some very interesting things. Before I get Keith to give us some information here that I'm thinking about, I wanted to just mention a couple of things about the backstory or the history, of why treasure signs are even prolific enough that we should even make a subject out of it. We're going to deal with two primary areas, not exclusively, but mostly tonight. We want to talk about Spanish treasure signs. And of course, I don't mean Spanish treasure signs as in Spain, naturally. We're talking about Spanish treasure signs that have been left by the thousands, literally, all over the southwestern United States. And we want to talk about the Knights of the Golden Circle treasure signs, because I think these two organizations, the Knights and the Spanish, it's not necessarily the Spanish conquistadors, as we're going to see momentarily, but the organization that was behind the Spanish treasure signs is actually a religious organization. And I'll bring that out in just a moment. But, what I wanted to say was, for those of you who don't live in the Southwest, Knights of the Golden Circle treasure signs can be found in every state in the Union. That is an all-inclusive subject. I've never checked, I say every state. I've never checked out Alaska and Hawaii, but I would frankly be surprised if there wasn't even some connection there. But what I want to do right quick before we bring Keith in here is to just mention that the reason why these thousands of Spanish treasure signs exist was due to the fact that there was a great effort That is, on the surface, the public was basically told that a very large church was making an effort to convert the Indians, and they sent their priests, into the United States, what would become the United States, to supposedly convert all these heathen Indian tribes. But there was a darker reality that has not been talked about a lot because of political correctness, I guess. And that was the fact that this organization was engaged in the gathering or mining of gold and silver to a great extent. It was a very, very well organized operation. They would set up a mission, and the priest in charge of that mission would actually have around that mission, within 50 or 60 miles, there would be a circle of mining operations that mostly were performed by Spanish soldiers. No, they weren't performed by the Spanish soldiers so much as under the direction of the Spanish soldiers. And they were using the Indians for slaves to work their mines. This is a fact. And when one mine would get a certain supply of bullion, it would be loaded on mules, and some of the soldiers would escort it down to the mission. And there would be generally under the area where the priest stood to conduct services, there would be a trap door leading down to a room below it, and they would store this bullion until it reached, until it filled up the room, and then they would send a message, send a runner or courier to one of the larger cities, and then that city would send out a contingent of two wheeled carts and wagons and a larger contingent of soldiers to guard, and they would come to that mission, and they would get this accumulated bullion and then take it on down to Mexico City, and where a large treasure trains would be assembled, and then they would go to the coast and load it on the ships, and it would head for Spain. And this is, of course, the source of the Spanish shipwrecks, this type of thing. So we know for a fact that this is true. There is historical evidence. For example, there was a famous priest in Arizona named Father Kino, Kino. Father Kino had a series of mines, I think at least 16 mines that he worked. And what happened was the Indian slaves rebelled in the 1680s, I believe it was, if I remember correctly. I'm working off memory here. Could be wrong on that by a few years. They rebelled and began to attack and kill the Spaniards and the priests in the mining operations. And so the Spanish were forced to retreat out of the Southwest to save their lives, and they cached their bullion and treasure that they had not gotten shipped to the coast, and that was a lot. And it created many, many Spanish treasures that are hidden in sealed up mine shafts and so on. And so with that being the reality, Father Kino was forced to also seal up his mines, and he sealed them up with large boulders, a boulder big enough to cover the entrance, and he would deeply carve into the rock, or have his men do it, a cross. And he would paint with black paint of some kind. He would fill the cross with black paint. So that was a distinctive identifying mark of Father Kino's mines. And back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, one of his mines was found in Arizona. And when the rock was rolled away from the entrance, there was something like 32 Indian skeletons chained to the wall, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that number, but there were a bunch of skeletons still chained to the wall, because the slaves that worked the mines had been sealed up alive in the mine when they closed it, to keep them from ever telling the location of the mine. So anyway, there's a little backstory. Keith, I'd like to bring you in now, and if you'd like to share some of your experiences with us in terms of coming across Spanish treasure signs, looking for related treasures. Go ahead.
When you were talking about them doing the mines and stuff there, Mexico was discovered by the Spanish as far as what we call Mexico now, was discovered about being so lucrative in the mountains of silver and gold. And the Spanish were having those Indians, as you call them, which was the Mayans and the Incas maybe, but mostly Mayans, take and do the digging for them, and they would just control the thing. And there was a guy at each one of those mines called a manifester. And he actually, after they poured these bars in raw pouring and stamped them the Queen's seal on it to go back to Spain as her gold, well, they would go and bury them. Well, a lot of these people working in the mine were do anything to get out of the mine, so they would volunteer to help go bury it. And since everybody in the past that went to bury it never came back, well, the Spanish were telling them, we sent them home, send them back to their tribe and stuff like that, which was not the case. When they dug that hole and buried that gold or silver, wherever the manifester logged it in his book, that would help them retrieve it and put it on the ships later, they were buried in the hole with it. And so the manifester always took his second with him, and they had to fill the hole in, But they always dug the hole a little bit bigger. And, of course, they were telling all the ones that were working for them in the mine, and they wanted to volunteer for the next ones to go out and bury it, And so they, it was a cycle, and they would pick up, make excursions into Mexico and South America to pick up more Mayans and bring them in to work the mines some more because of the lack of people that they just turned loose, supposedly, and where they actually buried them. So a lot of that is still lost, buried somewhere in Mexico, and still buried some in the mines around where the mines were in Mexico. And there's a old saying, I've had a number of people come in and buy just the machine for looking in that high mineralized soil of those mountains, that they say their grandpa or something that would be sitting there in the evening, and with the evening sun, just as it goes over the horizon, you would see a greenish blue haze up there in the mountain, just in this one spot and stuff. Well, actually, I had a friend of mine go up there, and he went there to where his grandpa saw that, and he actually took that detector and dug a 58 Ford truck bumper first up there. How that got up the mountain, I don't know. And then a fender off a Chevrolet of some year, I don't remember what it was, and then he found the gold bars. And, of course, the story from the grandpa and all this stuff had to be a bunch of gold bars up there, and he only found 16 instead of 600 that he wanted to find. But he did bring them back to the States, and how he got it in, I'm not exactly sure, but he did show them to me. I got to see them, rough-poured bars, actually stamped bars. And, a lot of that stuff, too, is captured on the ships going back to Spain. And you have different pirates, that came in down here around Padre Island and stuff here in Texas, and they would take their spoils and go up into Texas, even into Oklahoma, and bury some of that. And I'm actually chasing one now that has proved in one of the libraries that it's been found, according to a newspaper article, 2 of the spots, but they didn't know there was 9 spots in all. And we're looking for the other ones right now out in West Texas. So anyway, they were found rough, poured just like the ones I saw, and stamped with the Queen's seal. So that's what they would be stealing off the ship if they were going back to take those bars back to the Queen.
Yeah, I have not seen any gold Spanish bars myself, but while I worked at Garrett, I did have a professional treasure hunter I knew. We called him Frankie, that drove in his Winnebago, and he wanted to see Charlie Garrett, but Charlie Garrett was traveling and wasn't there. So he had told me to come out to his Winnebago, and I've mentioned this before, but it fits right in with tonight, so I'll just repeat it really quick. He looked around the parking lot to make sure nobody was watching. Then he unlocked the door and he said, "Stick your head in, look down the aisle." And the aisle from the just behind the driver's seat, all the way back to the bed in the very back of this 26-foot motorhome, the aisle was stacked with Spanish silver bars. They were crude smelted. They had bubble holes in them, where they weren't your professional bars like you see the pretty pictures of. But they all had the cross of Spain stamped in each one. And, I guess the bars were not huge. They were probably 10 inches long, maybe 3 inches thick, and about 2.5, 3 inches wide. But he had them stacked about 18 inches high all the way to the back of that motorhome. There was, several hundred. And, I did. You can't help yourself. It just kind of slips out. I asked him, I said, "Well, Frankie, where in the world did you find these?" And he told me more than most treasure hunters would. He said, "In a cave south of San Antonio." But, Keith, let's see if we start to focus in on some of the signs that the Spaniards used to mark these caches. Would you like to tell us, take that one and tell us some of that?
Well, yeah, the first thing that you need to know about is if it's Spanish, and some of the KGC did the same thing. They derived some of theirs from the Knights of Templar, which also was impressed by the Spanish since they were there in Spain, too. And the figurine for our treasure is the turtle. And whichever way the turtle is pointing, that's the direction you need to go. And so if you ever find a rock or a tree, and trees now that were marked with that are long gone, I'm sure, that has a turtle on it, well, then you need to be looking close because you're right there at it. But that's the main thing. Now, there's a couple of other markings that they use that helps you in directions, but there's real good books out on Spanish treasure signs, and I don't want to be wrong on some of them, but you'd be better off to go ahead and get those. But one of the things I learned the most about the treasure signs was off two people. One was a guy in, he's north of Abilene in a fort site up there. I can't remember the name of fort, but he was curator of that fort site. And it was a western fort, fought the Indians, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking his last name was Chastain. But anyway, I think it was Daniel Chastain or something like that. He was one of the ones that helped us with the only metal detecting museum in the United States that I know of, and that was at Cisco, Texas, where Sherry Eckhart was overseeing that and putting that together. And he did bring some rock signs to that museum and have them on display, and a few pictures that he had of other ones that he couldn't bring. But he donated some to the museum, and I donated a bunch of old-timey detectors that use 63.5-volt batteries and stuff like that, had wooden coils on them and stuff to hang from the ceiling. And we had actually done some work up there trying to put the rooms together and getting display cases in it and stuff. It was the old city hall is what he had for a museum, and he had legally got that, and we built some nice displays. But there is some beautiful rock signs in there. The actual rocks themselves, they chiseled out and brought in there and set on the floor, so it's something to see. And then the second person, go ahead.
Oh, it's all right. When you get a break there, I wanted to comment on the turtle.
Okay. And then the second thing that I learned from was a guy that actually used to work with Carl Fismer, and you know who he is. He's a treasure diver and off of Florida there, and he hunts a lot in Bahamas and stuff like that, and he does shipwrecks, and he's actually pulling the gold and silver off the ships. And the guy that he used was a guy named Jack Haskins. Jack Haskins was not maybe known to all of us, but was one of the best researchers of archaic Spanish, which all the shipping logs are kept in Spain, and they built a new building for it, a new housing area for it, and Jack had permanented entry into that. And anyway, he would study the archaic logs of these ships and what they were carrying, the manifest of what they were carrying. And he could tell them that this ship wrecked one of the fleet, because the ship didn't go by itself. It always went in multiple ships, and it wrecked, and it would tell where along the way in the Bahama Islands or something that nature. It was called something else back in the archaic Spanish days. And they would go seek that. That's what Carl does. He gets investors and goes out and seeks it and tries to find it. And if they find the ship, then it pays off. But they are removing some of those rough-poured silver and gold bars, sometimes China, some other stuff that they're importing. And but anyway, they actually get to see the stuff that's poured there in Mexico area and stuff when they're extravagating it from the mine, and they get to see what it's like when we pull it up off the ships and stuff of that nature. I've dove on some shipwrecks in the past, but I wasn't near what Carl Fismer is. He's way, way up there in league. He was nearly as good as Fisher on the
Atocha.
The Atocha and Mel Fisher. So anyway, Carl's just a little bit lower scale of it, but he still goes out and still finds it. So
Keith, I'm going to jump in here and just kind of remind you, because you've got so much information, and underwater treasure hunting and recovery bars and stuff is really another subject. We really want to get back to this treasure signs. I want to try to keep us on course here, because a lot of stuff that we can bring out on that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let me go back to the turtle. You absolutely brought up a very important part of Spanish treasure symbology. The turtle is probably the first Spanish treasure sign that I ever read about and got fascinated with. And on a particular project, I began to work Spanish treasures buried in Texas. At the time that I was working I was a metal detector dealer, not yet working at the Garrett factory, but I met Charles Garrett and invited him to participate in a Spanish treasure hunt that I had some proprietary information on. We had a map made in the 1700s. It was drawn on an old, and it showed a starting point. It showed a turtle. And I actually was able to find the site. This map was not like you're looking straight down on it. It was like you're standing in front of a kind of a mesa with a little mounds or hills cutting off of one side of it. You're looking at you're just standing there looking straight ahead, and you're seeing this perspective on the map. And way over on the right side is a turtle. And the map says that there was 20 mule loads of gold bullion buried in a sealed mine shaft. A burro could carry about 200 pounds of bullion. So anyway, we were looking for the turtle that would confirm that we had the right site, because I found out in West Texas between San Angelo and Abilene, I found a spot on a big 50,000-acre ranch that looked pretty good. It looked like the map outline. And so I thought, well, we've got to find the turtle. And again, it didn't give us any information on what the turtle was. Was it carved on a tree? Was it, a stone that was shaped kind of like a turtle? On the John Swift treasures that I worked in Central Kentucky, there was a turtle involved in that, but it was actually one big giant flat rock about a foot thick that was 6 feet long, and it was shaped like a turtle. So we didn't know exactly what we were looking for. And so we were out there hunting for this sign, walking around in the about waist high brush. There was a lot of cleared space between the various bushes, but I happened to walk right upon a great big old western diamondback rattlesnake crawling across the trail right in front of me. And I thought, well, I'm just going to give you a healthy detour. So I turned to my left and I walked right into the middle of the turtle. The turtle was about 6 foot in diameter. It was made out of individual rocks, and a triangular rock had been used for the head, triangular rocks for the feet, and 2 or 3 rocks for the tail, each one getting smaller. So it's not always a carved turtle or a single rock turtle, but it can be made out of rocks. In this case, the turtle gave a true reading, which was the head pointed towards the area where this sealed mine shaft was. The other Spanish treasure sites, you can't always depend on the head pointing towards the treasure. You want to look for, if it's made out of rocks, is one of the legs a little bigger? Does it stand out a little more than the other 3 legs? If it does, that's the direction that you probably want to go in. Sometimes the tail points towards. The one of the things about Spanish treasure signs, Keith, and I think you can give me an amen on this. One of the things about Spanish treasure signs is there's no set rule that the sign that means one thing on one treasure will mean exactly the same thing on the next.
Right.
People were individuals, and they would add or change make little variations in what that marker meant. They would use similar markers. It might be a heart. Keith, have you ever come across the drill hole markers, where they drilled holes in rocks, like in a line, like 3 holes?
Yep, I sure have.
Yeah.
Especially going across a gorge or something like that, pointing at a blocked up cave on the other side. They would have certain length dowels that would go in those holes that they drilled, and the tip of those would line up to where you would locate that cave or wherever they put the treasure on the other side of the
Have you come across any signs, Keith, that show, the symbols they use to show a sealed cave?
No, I don't believe I have. We don't really have that kind of stuff right here, but in the places I've been, has been more refined as far as, for us to even attempt to go out there and try to find it. So
yeah, generally, if it's not a natural cave, if it's a natural cave, it'll have a round top, straight side, straight bottom into the carving. If it's a sealed shaft, it usually is a square. It indicates a mine shaft that was artificially made, by miners digging back in. And sometimes there'll be a line across, like from one corner of the square to the next. Sometimes there will be half of the square might be chiseled an inch deeper than the rest of the square to indicate something has been sealed up. There's several variations of the signs, and like Keith said, there is a book on a good one, 2 or 3 of them on Spanish treasure signs and symbols. And I didn't really have time to get to find my copy, which is somewhere in my hundreds of books. It's a small book, and I couldn't lay hands on it real quickly today. But Keith, in the process of working a Spanish treasure site, have you ever had in your hands any maps like that deerskin map I was mentioning that actually, were waybills to treasure?
No, I've had a copy of one of Gene Lafitte's maps where he buried some up in West Texas, but I haven't. I've seen his rough drawings and stuff in the past, but I've not had any skin ones. No.
Okay. Do you think, just real quick question, for those of you that like to research treasures, if you don't know about the Beale treasure, I think it's Beale. That's what it's spelled. The Beale treasure, very famous treasure, was supposed to have been buried, I believe, end up in Virginia. But there were those who thought that Beale was an alias for Jean Lafitte, and that the treasure of that story was actually, part of Lafitte's, or maybe most of Lafitte's treasure. Have you ever heard anything on that, Keith?
I've heard of the Beale before, but I don't remember the research on it right offhand, no.
What is the name of that lake, Keith? It's somewhere, I think, in your part of the state there that supposedly a fellow named John Trammell dumped wagon loads of silver bars in.
Yeah, that's
Henderson Lake is Hendricks Lake. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Hendricks.
Yeah. Do you have anything on that story?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a guy here in actually from South Texas that just wrote 2 books on it.
Really?
And yeah, he's been talking to landowners and old past owners and stuff like that of the land around there, and the stories that their folks left to them and what have you. And he's written a real good book on it. I happen to have one of his books. I haven't got the second one yet. He come visit our treasure club, and I bought it off of him right after he published the first one, and the second one's supposed to be real good too.
Okay.
But I do know about that treasure, and I know the pretense of it, but I could get in deeper with it. I don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Have you ever run across examples, or just stories, if you haven't actually seen, but where they took the Spanish buried stuff in a mine shaft and they sealed it up with their version of on-site concrete that was made with gravel, sand, and antelope blood? Have you ever
heard of their on-site concrete, but I didn't know it was made with animal blood. So,
I have a piece of that came out of one of these shafts that was excavated by a treasure hunter I knew, and it was in South Texas. And I will have to I've got that in my display case. I'd forgotten all about it till we started talking about this subject. I will get that out and I will photograph it and I'll post it on All Metal Mode so everybody can see what that looked like. These guys spent 3 months chiseling their way. This stuff makes extremely strong concrete. And they spent 3 months chiseling their way 40-some feet down a diagonal shaft that was full of it before they finally got to what had been cached there. Okay, anyway, back to treasure signs. Keith, are you familiar with the Spanish term vera or vara?
Seems like I remember reading it somewhere, but I don't remember what it was.
It was their version of what we would call a yard.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite 30. It wasn't quite 36 inches, but they would measure the distance between signs or to the treasure in veras or varas, is the way you say it in Spanish. Vara.
Right.
Roll your R's. And sometimes you will see that in a rock. There'll be just a V. There might be, if it says like 3V, then that would mean 3 veras to either the spot where you dig or the next sign.
Right.
Keith, do you? I'm trying to remember some of the other markers they used. Like you said, you mentioned.
I've seen a number of what you would call half turtles. You ever seen a half turtle sign?
I don't believe I've ever seen a half turtle.
And they draw one side of the turtle with both feet and half the head and half the shell. And that half turtle sign, and I've yet to see them in any treasure sign books, would mean to follow that turtle, but go to the next treasure sign, which would have the other half of the turtle drawn on it. And then at some point, you would follow it and find the whole turtle drawn there. So it was just leading you on. There's a number of ways that Spanish put it to keep going, like if there's a river to cross, well, they would show 2 waves to be a river. And if it was high embankment on one side, they would show that Vera sign that you're talking about a while ago. The embankment on the opposite side of the river, from where you're standing looking at the wave sign of the river, be the opposite side, be downward, and it is a higher bank or a Vera, 2 or 3 Veras higher than side, and you know you'd be at the right spot at that point.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the wave sign. For those of you that are trying to visualize, imagine, if you took a half circle and you kind of pointed it down, and then you took the next half circle, turned it up the other way, connected it, and then turned the next one down, next one up, next one down. They would, like just simulate waves or water motion. And I haven't seen a 2-line one, Keith. I've seen several 3-line ones.
I've seen the 3-line too, but it seems like over here in West Texas, we're seeing more of the 2-line instead of the 3.
Okay.
I don't know whether that's later than early or earlier than 3. I don't know.
Do you think that could be a
3?
Do you think that could be part of a personal signature of the same person, hiding the different ones?
It could be, yeah. Except for I think it's been on 2 different treasures, but it could still be the same person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, it really helps if I were going if somebody came to me and said, I want to get started hunting Spanish treasure, I'd tell them, what you have to do is you have to really study everything that's been written. A lot of the priests could write, and they kept journals, and they told about experiences in certain areas. But what you have to do is you have to study their writings and begin to see how they thought, how they looked at life, how they saw everything. And that can be a big key to understanding how they marked their treasures. Because, again, the Spanish did not think like Americans do today in terms of hiding treasure or making markers. They were not as complex as the Knights of the Golden Circle, which we'll get into before we're done here. But this thing about individuality, like I said, one of the things I had to learn was don't take what this marker meant on Project 1. Don't assume that it means exactly the same thing on Project 2. Also, when you're working an area, look for similarities in projects that indicate that the same person was in charge of hiding whatever it was that you're looking for.
Yeah, a lot of times that's awful hard to extrapolate because unless you're into some of that archaic Spanish that would have had it back in the day where they were hiding that stuff, they just hide it so they're not caught on the ship with it until they get ready to leave for Spain, and then they put it back on the ship, or either they leave it hidden for whatever purpose. Jean Lafitte was big about hiding that stuff for himself, and after he'd paid his crew off with their share of it, he always, being captain, would get the most part, and he put his up where it couldn't be taken from him. And so I'm sure they had some kind of something to tell him where it's at. Like this particular map I was talking about that we got our hands on was the great-granddaughter of Jean Lafitte. And it was her great-grandmother, I think, that gave her those paperwork. And in that paperwork, I found out the grandmother was that. Well, this friend of mine down in Orange went and talked to her. and they crawled up in the attic and got the boxes of paper worked out, and that's where they found the copy of Jean Lafitte's map. So, hand-drawn map.
That's amazing.
Yeah, to find something still in existence like that, it's way amazing.
Yeah, the map itself is a treasure.
Absolutely. It's worth some money. All he did was initial the map. So it's got his initials. I'm trying to remember what his middle name was, but it seemed like it was L or something like that. But anyway, he initialed the map in the bottom corner, and he did it in like italicized writing.
Well, that's really neat.
Yeah.
The mule or the burro was the pretty much standard workhorse as far as hauling bullion out of remote areas. If they couldn't get the two-wheeled, there wasn't a road good enough for the two-wheeled Spanish carts, then again they would pack them on the mules. One of the things that was on the map that had the turtle, and I won't leave you hanging as far as the outcome of that project. I'll tell you in just a moment. But one of the things, the next, the turtle's head pointed towards a mule with pack saddles on it, and a man leading the mule, and they're walking in a particular direction. And there was another rock marker that actually pointed at a 90-degree angle to the trail you followed. If you followed the walking mule, you came to this rock marker, and it was pointing to the hill, the side of the hill where the sealed up mine shaft was that had this bullion in it. Well, it took us quite a while to find that marker. We were beginning to think it had been displaced. I mean, this is a working ranch, and even though it's not on a road, it's on the side of a very large mesa. A mesa is a flat top hill. And we finally found the rock marker. It was much bigger than we thought it would be. And it was kind of amazing because it was sitting on a pillar of dirt underneath it, about 8 to 10 inches high, and the ground around it had eroded, and the weight of the rock had kept the dirt from washing out, beneath it. There it was, kind of perched up there. And we had walked by it several times and just weren't seeing it as the treasure sign. And finally, we just happened to come at it. One of us, I forget now who, came at it from an angle and saw and realized there's what we're looking for. Now, we know from this marker that within 100 foot of a straight line, approximately 100 feet, because there was a reference to the Veras, that there's a sealed mine shaft. Problem was, the ranch owner, he was one of those guys that was land rich and dirt poor, as they say about those West Texas ranchers. He had 50,000 acres because he showed us all of his property, from an elevated position. He showed us this. He said, see those hills way over there across the valley? And we're looking at hills that are about 5 miles away. I said, well, yeah. He says, well, that's the boundary of my property on that side, and so on. But the farmer would let us, he said we could dig by hand, but we couldn't bring in any equipment. And what we needed to do was bring in a dozer and scrape that 100-foot line, scrape it down 3 or 4 feet, and then overfly it with a small plane and take infrared pictures of right after we scraped it towards sundown. And the sealed mine shaft would show up as a different color because the dirt wouldn't be as packed as hard as the surrounding dirt. But he would not let us do, and the problem was each time we dug, he wanted the holes filled back in. And we were going down there on weekends. I still had to work for a living, and we just couldn't finish the project. It's still there in that hill. It's out near Brant, Texas. Anybody that wants wants to pursue that, they can contact me, and I will try to give you all the information I have on it, because I know I'm never going to get back to it. So I'm sure the landowner has long since died. He was an old man then when I was in my 30s. So it'll be a new property owner you'd have to deal with and so on. But anyway, that was my first experience with really serious Spanish treasure signs. And the turtle was the very first one I ever found. Keith, how about
you have to work to get to the turtle. Some people just get it right off. I mean, that I was talking about we were talking about treasure signs. Have you ever seen the two lines with like a little dome on top without touching the lines?
Yeah, matter of fact, I have.
Do you know what that means?
I have, honestly, I think I did, but I've forgotten. I only saw it once.
Yeah. Well, I found out what they meant when I went on a excursion with them at West Texas too, and it was actual on a rock, and we're thinking the treasure's somewhere around there, and we're searching for a turtle. But what it was it meant the two lines meant a high cliff, and the dome on top was a dug hole that was buried in. And we ended up finding that was on the other side after I'd dropped out of the thing 5 years later. They found out that the dome marking was on a rock on the other side of a deep draw ravine on a rock over there, and it grown over with some growth and stuff, and somebody happened to find it and tell me about it.
That's
you need to find another sign, because somewhere just having the dome top means either right behind where you're talking about, or there's another sign to lead you somewhere else. But the two lines obviously meant a high cliff. And that's
a good one, yeah.
Yeah.
And Keith, you just hit on something that we really want to focus on a moment. Sometimes the sign you're looking for is carved into a rock is full of moss, and you can't see it until you take a wire brush and scrape that moss away, and then suddenly the treasure sign just jumps out at you. I was actually I was doing a big landscape job in Dallas at 4 commercial buildings, and we were putting in an artificial creek system with these big giant rock slab sandstone bridges. And we were getting these off of a ranch down west of Fort Worth near Millsap, Texas. And this creek was just full of these big slab boulders that were about 6-8 inches thick. They would be 8-10 feet long and 4 to 5 feet wide, perfect for making bridges about the same width as the sidewalks that led across through this artificial creek system. So we got one of these bridges, one of these big slabs. We got it all cemented into the project, and it looked great, except it was covered with about 1.5 inches of green moss. So I had one of the guys take a wire brush. I said, people are going to walk on that. It's going to look ragged and ugly and everything. Let's just go ahead and clean all the moss off. And when he did, he uncovered a carving in the rock. It was the most incredibly artistic human face. Very, very well done. And beneath it was W. Gilchrist, Gilchrist, 18, I think 51, something like that. And this was amazing. We figure that this big slab, which was laying at about a 45-degree angle on this creek bank, we think he might have been killed by Comanche Indians there, and that his buddies just took that rock and made it a memorial stone for him, because this creek was very close to the trail that ran from Dallas through Fort Worth all the way out to the 49er Goldfields in California.
We sold a guy a metal detector. Got permission to hunt on Pancho Villa's ranch.
Yeah.
And so he sent me some texts back with a picture of writings on rocks and stuff. And this is one of the points I wanted to make. A lot of times you can determine the general age of writings because of what the writings are. I mean, you're able to, figure out, okay, this is old enough to be in, the period of Spanish, or it's either younger than that or something of that nature. So I was looking at this and I was going, no way, there just wasn't stick figures drawn in Spanish. I've never seen one. Books, it's a stick figure human being, a round circle, and all sticks for legs and arms and body. So it turned out that Pancho Villa was doing that to mark where his treasures were. But again, he had a measure system that I was unfamiliar with, and I told the guy it has to be a measurement, and it has to be telling you at the angle it's showing what degree of difference that you need to walk or go to. What they had done is they found 3 of his treasures while they were digging fence post holes, putting up new fence for the new owner. And they found 3 of the treasures that away that Pancho Villa had stuck down in there, and they were all gold coins. Spanish or some Spanish, some Mexican gold coins, and no American gold coins. So evidently it didn't have a lead to our bank. Of course, Pancho Villa did cross and did cross somewhere in the United States because we had too much trouble with him. But
yeah, they're El Paso.
Yeah. And
General John Pershing went after him, went into Mexico trying to catch him, never did. Right. And Keith, you brought to mind when Charles Garrett with Van Fossen and A.M. Van Fossen and a couple other guys made a trip into Mexico, and Charles Garrett met Pancho Villa's widow and got permission to metal detect search her house. And it had one of those enclosed Spanish gardens in it, with a fountain like a lot of Spanish haciendas did. Charles Garrett told me personally that he said, I got a really good reading in the wall of their bedroom, the master bedroom. And he said, we got another one right out by the fountain in the courtyard. And he was sure that those were caches of treasure, but he didn't tell Mrs. Villa. So he thought maybe they might have an opportunity to come back, sometime later, because she was a very old woman then. And after she was gone, they were going to come back and try to get those treasures. I don't think they ever did.
I think I know one person did.
Really?
Had connections with Charlie, yeah.
Okay.
But he told me about that. He told me about meeting Miss Villa and going out there and looking, searching. There were several of them that went, I think, and he told me about that. But that was so long ago, I can barely remember him telling me. But I think I know of, when we get together sometime. I'll tell you who it is. Okay. You won't believe it. But anyway, I think I know one person that did get it to the border, and that's as far as he could get it.
Really?
Across the border with it, yeah. It's still over there.
Wow.
He'll tell us exactly where. He said, if you're ever going, I'll tell you where it is. Good luck getting back with it.
Gotcha. Okay, is there anything else that you want to contribute on Spanish treasure signs before we move on to the Knights of the Golden Circle treasure signs?
Yeah, possibly what I touched on just a while ago, the dating of treasure signs. If you do get a chance, try to pick up Spanish treasure sign book. Can't remember the title of it at the time, but it says treasure symbols. Anyway, pick it up. It's not a real thick book, but it's really full of a lot of real good common information. Now, there's also Indian sign in it, too. So don't get that mixed up with what you're looking at in Spanish, because none of the Spanish adopted the Indian sign. And then if you're looking for people that passed away, similar like that big rock you found, a lot of the Spanish would create their own little symbolistic thing for a grave marker, because none of them could afford to buy a grave marker, to be honest with you, and wood wouldn't last that long out there as it is. So they, they used rock, and they got somebody they knew that could chisel good and chisel maybe the initials or the name of somebody in it, maybe just the last name. And a bunch of those Spanish or Mexicans down there had the same last name. So usually not the last name, but the first and initial what the last name is. So anyway, it is important. One of the most important things that one of the guys that was telling me at that fort site that knows these markings all too well, boy, it'd be good to get him on the podcast. He can tell you so much to shorten your headaches about tracing those signs. I don't know. I have lost connection with him about the last 15 years. I hope he's still alive, but I'll check with Jerry and make sure he's still out there and get his recent phone number, because I'm sure he's retired from the curator position in the museum at Fort Site north of Abilene. But anyway, he is really, really good at it, and he would be one that really could talk more so than both of us on it, because he can tell you all about the Indian sign, he can tell you all about the golden circle signs, and he can tell you all about the Spanish signs and the differences in them that you would see. And like I said, I dated that one just because he sent me the pictures, and I told him, well, there was no stick figures in Spanish. They had different things for different deals, but they just didn't draw a stick figure of somebody walking down the street, and stuff. So, I mean, you can give that one up. That somebody's playing with you. And I have seen that. Let me tell you that. I have walked creeks, and something that would be just plain and evident to everybody and still there is usually somebody just playing a fast one on you and trying to do the sides and get you curious, and it has no treasure involved whatsoever. They're just messing with you. But sometimes you can take that all the way back to the Spanish signs, if they are Spanish signs, and read what it says, and you put all that together, and they said, you just been had. That's what it'll end up saying in the long run. I think somebody told me about that one. Might have been that guy I was telling you about in Fort Site. He uses it for example. But anyway, it's really good to contact those that are really knowledgeable on that. And if he is still around, I'll see if I can get hold of him, see if he wouldn't mind being on a podcast one day.
Sounds great.
Because he can really talk a great deal about it, and especially his subject. He was into treasure signs before he ever became any part of that fort site. And actually his background in that, studying signs, led to him getting that job, I'm sure, or made him experience enough they wanted to hire him. So anyway, I'm pretty sure it's Chastain or something like that. I'll check with Jerry. I haven't been able to get hold of Jerry. His wife occupies the phone all the time, but I'll try to get hold of him through email.
Okay, great. And let me say this for the benefit of our listeners. This is not meant to be an end-all, be-all, expose on treasure signs. This is an introduction to treasure signs, because indeed, Keith and I both are aware there are people who have made, a detailed study of it. If you spend your life or a large percentage of your time studying one particular aspect of treasure hunting, then as the years go by, you ought to get pretty good at it. It's just the way things go. Keith and I have been back and forth into so many different aspects of treasure hunting, and we've tried to pick up as much knowledge as we could about these different aspects, and we've become pretty good on some of them. I ended up doing a lot of Civil War relic hunting, and I've actually had the honor of being. I have a local university that I'm their relic identification expert. When they need somebody to identify relics from their archaeological projects that they can't identify, they call me, and I go to the college and they show me what they found, and I try to help them make identifications. But the point is, you can't become really expert at everything, every aspect of treasure hunting. I've done a little gold nugget hunting, but man, if I got out with a real nugget hunter, I'd be like first grade, like first day at school. I spent a day with a professional geologist up in the mountains of Nevada last summer, he gave me and my partner a class in gold geology, what to look for when you're hunting vein gold. And I learned more in that one day. I learned 10 times more about gold geology in one day than I'd picked up in 40 or 50 years, of treasure hunting. So, there's always somebody out there that is really, really good at what they do. And that's where we want to make our connections, if at all possible. Part of the fun of treasure hunting is you never, ever run out of things to learn. Keith and I'll be the first ones to tell you, we're still learning and learning and learning. And for all the knowledge we picked up, there are people that know far more than we do about particular aspects of things that we know something about. So anyway, all right, let's move on into the Knights of the Golden Circle, because this is probably the single most prolific source of treasure signs in the whole United States. I don't know any other group that left as many signs related to the caching of treasure than they did. One of the things, and Keith will bring you in here in just a second, one of the things that I want to impress upon you about the Golden Circle, unlike the Spanish, who just basically you have to deal with little variations in interpretation of symbols, once in a while major variations, but generally they're just little localized variations and things. Whereas with the Knights of the Golden Circle, it was an organization that had men of very high intellect in it, very, very high intelligence. And they put together very, very complex systems of signs and symbols for hiding their treasure. And they actually had 7 different codes that they used, 7 different. And in those codes, you have to know which code you're dealing with, because what a symbol means in one of the codes may mean something entirely different in another one of the codes. A friend of mine, treasure hunter that specialized in hunting treasures in Oklahoma, found a cave and sent me pictures of it, and it had Egyptian hieroglyphics, a whole band of them carved all the way around this big circular room at about waist height. And they were not put there by the Egyptians. The Egyptian hieroglyphics was actually one of the codes used by the Golden Circle. Keith, and have you worked much on the Golden Circle there in the Texas area?
Yes and no. I have Hillbilly Bob's books on it, and that's where I got in to start reading about how he tracks some of this down. And to me, he's an authority on that. And John London used to go with him all the time and stuff. But they really know their sign language on that. But
he's a KGC Sentinel.
Yeah. He's, he has told me several times that just around his home there's 4 or 5 left buried treasures of the KGC. And he's tried to get permission or something of that nature on them, and either hasn't got the permission or hasn't finished his research on it yet to really pinpoint it. So he's getting to the point now he's interested in, maybe somebody he can trust for helping him out. So he told me when I got healthy enough to come see him. But, and I might. So I know that, the Templars were the ones that kind of got that rolling, and they were, like you said, very educated people, and they really knew their stuff, and they knew that anything that would be too easily figured out by them would be too easy. So you have to have some degree of intelligence to go after that sometimes. But then I do get a call from a guy that was in Monroe, and he lived on this place at one time, and his grandfather actually hit an underground bunker, which the Knights of Golden Circle would do that in less rocky places. And they hung the corner of it with a deep plow. And they got to digging on it, and turned out it was a room underground. And it turned out that it was, jury rigged to hurt you if you tried to go in the door. And his grandfather nearly had his head cut off with a razor wire hidden that popped up and got him. And then the next time they were smart enough to line the doorway and entranceway with 3/4-inch plywood and nail it up to one another. And then we went in there, and some spears went through the wall and stuck halfway out the wood on the other side. They were well springed, I might say. So they are booby-trapped if you find one of these caches somewhere or think you have a cache. But anyway, this guy that called me that used to live there, it was his father and his grandfather that discovered it, and he got in on it being the only other male in the family and was told never to say anything about it. Well, his father and his grandfather were killed cutting firewood. The tree fell on both of them and broke their necks. So he took this to adulthood, knowing about it, and wanted me to come out there, and he heard I real good with a 2-box machine that will find treasure deeper, and see if I could relocate that exactly in the pasture as he remembered it, where it was plowed at. Well, it turns out that another lady owns the property now, wouldn't let him on it. And he thought he was doing a real good thing by going to the small town nearby and talked the sheriff and a judge into going out there and convincing her to let her on so they could find that treasure. That was a mistake. I told him right there, don't bother to call me for 10 years at least. Because now you got 2 legal guys to carry a gun on their hip, and you go in and get the treasure out, guess where you're going to be after it's all found? You're going to be right back in there locked in yourself. That's just not the way I'm going to do it. And so anyway, I just told him I didn't want any part of that, and I'm sure that to this day they're probably making the daily pass by the property, trying to see if anybody's out there digging, because unless they're both passed away, I don't know. But this was about 25 years ago when he called me up wanting me to help him north. But anyway,
yeah.
The reason, you're cutting in. So
go ahead.
When they built this new Highway 49 at Freeport going south, there was 2 of them found, and the one I never got to see either one of them, but the guy that in Minnie, Louisiana, went up there and videotaped the second one. He brought a camera with him that time, and he watched the military dig them, and they haven't been heard from since. So there's no telling where those treasures ended up, but that's what they were. They were, again, bunkers underground full of treasure, and that's nearly KGC every time that you go find something like that. Build a whole bunker like that.
Yeah, one of the reasons you want to bring, one of the laws involved, almost all of your law a high percentage of them are Masons. And remember, it was the Scottish Rite Masons, the KGC were Scottish Rite Masons. And they were the ones hiding this trade. So, once you get other Masons involved in it, your security's compromised. And they're going to be more inclined to protect the treasure rather than to help you recover it.
Right.
Leave it in place, this type of thing. So, anyway, getting back to the signs, some of the common signs that were used, let's say we're going to go beyond the Egyptian hieroglyphics. That's just a really complicated code, and I cannot read that myself. I can read a little bit of it, but not anywhere near fluently. And I had the opportunity to run with a man who had been very high in the KGC and who knew all the codes and taught me, some things about them. Sword carved in a rock, Bowie knife, pistol, all of those are common. If there is any such thing as common KGC signs, the pistol and the Bowie knife, of course, they loved reversals. So here's this pistol carved in a rock, and you look down the barrel, and here's this other rock formation across the valley, and you're thinking, oh, this is perfect. The barrel's pointing right to that rock formation. And if you go to that rock formation, yes, you are going to find another sign there because the pistol barrel did point to another sign. But it may well be a false trail that leads you through several different markers over miles before you finally can't find the next marker, and you conclude, well, it must have been disturbed, or it's gone, or it's no longer there. And actually, you were following a false trail because the real trail was the direction that the butt of the pistol, the handle, pointed in. The bottom of the handle is like at a 90-degree angle to the barrel. So you have to be prepared for those reversals on the signs. The same thing if you have a Bowie knife, and it has the little what do you call the little piece of metal that protects your hand?
Hip. The hip.
Yeah, well, it may be pointing. See what you have in effect. If it sticks up or goes out both sides of the where the blade joins the handle, you have like a compass. You have the blade and the handle are pointing like east-west, and then here's this little, what you call it, the hip? The half?
Hip or hilt. They use both
and
terminologies in the West.
Yeah, it's pointing north and south. So you're thinking, wow, here's the blade, the big old blade, that's the direction we want to follow. When the little bitty hilt or little piece is actually pointing north, then that may be the way. Of course, you can always backtrack. If you follow one trail, and you might waste some time, but you learn in doing. And another thing, if Jesse James was involved in the hiding of a cache,
right,
as he was in so many, you may find the letters HWH connected together. That was a symbol he used for JWJ, Jesse Woodson James. But if you see that HWH, then you've got a site that Jesse James was personally involved in hiding. Any site, especially a cave, that has any remnants of a red hand painted or carved in the rock above it means danger. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, jumping back on Spanish treasure signs for a second, if you find the word peligro, Peligro, carved on a Spanish site, it means danger. There's some kind of danger, hidden danger, possibly a booby trap, but you've got to be on guard. In one case I know of, the treasure hunter thought, well, that's something that's probably long gone. It might probably been Indians or something, and he hadn't gone very far in the direction he was supposed to go, and he started seeing big old rattlesnakes everywhere. There was a giant rattlesnake den that was protecting that treasure site, and he said that they killed rattlesnakes. They came back with shotguns and they killed rattlesnakes for 2 or 3 hours and never made a dent in the population. All the shooting did was stir up the snakes and bring more out of the den, and they finally gave up on that one. But anyway, getting back on the Golden Circle, every state has them, and when you're hunting Golden Circle treasure signs, and I mentioned some of this, we did a show on the KGC, and I'm not trying to cover old ground just to fill a show, but since that time, we picked up new listeners, people that didn't hear that show, and again, the subject fits right in here on the sign. So, I want to mention a couple of things about the Golden Circle signs. And one of them, Keith, have you heard of the Hoot Owl Trail trees?
I think I have, yeah. I think so.
Okay, do you know what the origin of that term is and what it means?
No.
Okay, then let me explain it for the benefit of the listeners. Jesse James and the famous botanist Luther Burbank became close friends. And Luther Burbank taught Jesse how to graft limbs onto trees. And they would take and graft a limb from another tree onto an already established tree, and that limb would come out of the tree at a right angle about 3 or 4 feet, usually 3 or 4 feet above the ground. And if you were not, if you didn't understand grafting, you would probably never guess years later when you saw this tree that limb was not natural. You'd say, well, look at that funny tree. That limb comes right out at a right angle, 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And all the other limbs are way up there. Well, what you're looking at is a Hoot Owl trail tree. Since all of the Golden Circle operatives, members, were operating outside the law, they considered themselves to be outlaws. And they referred, the outlaws were men who had heard the owl hoot. Now that means that you've had to camp out in the wilderness, fleeing the law, this type of thing. So they would mark the trails that led to the hideouts with these Hoot Owl trail trees. But they also served another purpose. One that we worked down in Texas, one of the projects, and I've got pictures. I'll try to get. I'll have to take pictures of the pictures and see if I can get some of those up to show everybody. I've got pictures of me at a Hoot Owl trail tree, and we dug down with the information I had. We dug down 4 feet right underneath that big old limb. That limb had been there a long time. It was over a foot thick. And it came out, and we dug down 4 feet as instructed to do, and we found a triangular piece of iron. And the longest side, the longest point on that triangle was the direction that was pointing to the next treasure sign. So you see, some treasure signs were not even visible on the surface. You had to dig down just to find the next sign, and you better be careful and don't disturb, don't move that, excuse me, don't move that marker out of place before you know clearly how it's laid out in the hole, which way it's actually pointing. So anyway, Keith, that was one of the most interesting, methods of hiding a treasure sign that I'd ever come across.
Well, there you go. See, I learned something right there. So you always learn if you always keep an open mind to learning, and don't think that you know it all yet. Well, that's going to benefit you in the long run when you're treasure hunting.
Well, that was that was something that was shared with to me by Jesse Lee James III, Jesse's grandson. Or I would have never known. But that was amazing about how Luther Burbank and Jesse, became friends, and Burbank taught him actually how to graft and make those limbs. Now, these Hoot Owl trail trees were usually oaks, and quite a few of them are still actually in existence today and are alive. If you ever find one of these trees, it would be really good to check and see. Now, sometimes there might even be a cache buried under that limb. It wouldn't be a huge cache. It might be a few $1,000s in gold. That was designed as emergency funds for members of the Golden Circle that were on the lam, that they were being chased by the law. They'd had to flee where they lived. They'd been discovered or whatever. And these little caches were put all over the country where the Golden Circle members could go and have funds that they needed, to buy whatever they had to do, buy a train ticket, to the other side of the country or get a ship to somewhere, whatever it took to get away from the law. That was all part of the whole system.
Yeah, I know Hillbilly Bob can tell you about those small caches because he's gone after a lot of Jesse James caches before and found some of them, and he can tell you right up front, Jesse was putting money back to just get him down the road to the next spot and stuff like that. It'd just be good money, but back in those days, but it was just not a great deal of money. And he may have picked a place that was too small to rob, and he'll take that money rather than try to split it up. He'll just take it and bury it. Say he'll come back and use it when we have no food or anything like that. So I've heard of him talk to several about smaller caches that Jesse James has left in the past that they have found personally. So.
Well, Jesse told me that at the time of his grandfather's death, that his estate was worth about $2 billion. Wow. And all the James family relatives descended on Jesse III, who was the executor, demanding their share. And so Jesse Lee James' response was he never probated the will. So he told me a lot of that treasure, had been lost because of that. But he said that greedy family members didn't get a penny. So Jesse, was very personally wealthy, as well as the fabulous wealth of the Golden Circle amassed. They had, and here's a project for somebody, they had 96 working gold mines, or 96, wait a minute. Memory may fail me here. The figure is either 96 or 92. I think it's 92 working gold mines between the end of the Civil War and 1916. They worked these gold mines out in West Texas, out towards Big Bend country and El Paso, out in that area. And in one of them, he told me they concealed a chest of gold coins, and these gold coins are square; they're not round. He couldn't remember any more details about the coins, so I do not know what their actual origin is, but I do know that his information he gave me tons of information that took me all over the southwestern states, and I found his information to be extremely accurate. So I have no doubt he's telling the truth. But apparently these coins are so rare now. They may have been made in California, but one coin would be a treasure if you could find this chest. A whole chest full of them would be an incredible fortune. But anyway, the Golden Circle is a project that requires a lot of careful thinking, a lot of learning. a lot of patience because you're going to go down false trails. Um, you know, I used to be on a particularly big treasure hunting forum, and I would have people send me pictures of golden circle signs wanting me to interpret the signs. And I would tell them, look, I can take a guess, but all you're showing me is the rock with the carving. I need to see the terrain. I need to understand. I need to see it from the perspective that whoever hid the treasure and made that sign saw it, if you really want a good interpretation. But of course, nobody wanted to give me that information because they're thinking, oh, he's going to jump in there and steal our treasure if we do that. So it was amazing how they would, rather than get, in some cases, I could have helped them find that treasure. And Keith, you probably had experiences like this, but they were so paranoid or so worried about me or somebody else getting their treasure that they wouldn't share any more information than that little tiny bit. And yet they'd want me to write a book, based on just looking at this one rock and this one treasure sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've told many about treasure that they're chasing, and I'll tell them I have to see the terrain around it to be able to tell them anything. That's usually where they quit, right there, as far as asking. But anybody would tell them the same thing, that he had a great deal of information to give them. It'd be the same thing for them as well as it was for you there. But,
yeah, and I understand they're thinking this is their one chance, their one big ticket, to wealth. And the problem is that that paranoia can actually prevent them from finding the treasure. But again, a lot of people. We had a fellow in our Civil War group that posted some signs he found in the rock, and he's from New England.
mm-hmm.
And he thought they were Indian signs. And I told him no. He says, anybody know what these Indian signs, what they mean? And I said, well, they're not Indian signs. They're Knights of the Golden Circle treasure markings. Well, that kind of blew him away. He never expected that. But then he clammed up, disappeared, and left the group. So I guess he again got paranoid and thought we might try to steal his site or something. I didn't even know where it was. I mean, I knew which state, but that's that's not going to do it. But you never know, as far as how far you can go with these sites. Sometimes you find an empty hole. And by the way, if you ever find a cache, the old time treasure hunters, you know what they would do when they found one? They would leave one piece. If it was gold coins, they'd leave one gold coin, or they'd leave a silver dollar or whatever it was. They'd leave one in the hole for the next person to find, to let them know that, yes, you did good, you found the site, but sorry, I beat you to it. It was actually a courtesy. It was just a common thing among the old-time treasure hunters. Anyway, the red hand means danger. And there are things you don't play around with. One guy got into a cave, and it branched into 3 openings. And the openings had been sealed with clay. And there were leather straps sticking out of the clay. Anybody guess why? You got any idea, Keith, why there were leather straps sticking out of the clay that sealed up the entrances?
My first thought is to use it to pull the entrance down, or the blockage in the entrance, but I'm not sure, no.
Okay, what happens to rawhide or leather when you pour water on it?
Yeah, it draws up.
It draws up. So what they did was they put the straps in wet. And then as they dried, the straps tightened up and cocked the triggers on the booby traps. You break that wall, that clay wall, and you set off the booby trap.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a very competent treasure hunter, and he spent several years trying to figure a way around that and never could figure out. The only way would have been to, tunnel in from the side, which would have been a hugely expensive project.
Yeah. Well, like I was telling you about that bunker outside in the Monroe, those guys were, the grandfather had already nearly cut his throat, and he went back in, and now he's got shafts sticking through the wood that he put up there, 3/4-inch decking, and he said, my gosh, the way those things were loaded would gone right through him, and he kind of reached around the corner and was able to reach and grab some coins he felt in a box, and the lights they were using to look in there was everything from chandeliers to tea services, all kinds of stuff of treasure that was in there. And when he grabbed that handful of coins, he came out, and I think they said it was 28 gold escudos, which were Spanish. Gold
Whoa.
And so he did get some treasure out of it, pulling out of it, but what they did is there was too many relatives that lived in the same area, and everybody was starting to question why they're digging such a hole out there in the pasture or out in the plowed area. And so they covered it back up to come back to it later when there'd be less interest on it and less people running around. So that's why when they were out cutting firewood for that winter, well, the tree fell on and broke both their necks. Well, the guy that was contacting me lost his daddy and his granddaddy in one blow right there, and he was the only one left knowing about that bunker out there. But he was kind of a young kid, so he wasn't sure to this date where it was, and he called me to come out there with a toolbox to see if I could find it with all the metal that was in that bunker. And I'm not sure I could, depending on how deep it was and stuff, but I would think that I would get some kind of reading on it. But when he told me he had the other two guys involved, that's something you do not want to do, especially when they're legal to carry a gun on them and stand there and watch you and do none of the work. So you're digging it up for them. So anyway, I just told him, I said, no, I'm not going to put myself in that kind of risk at all. I had to explain it to him because he was a little bit more country than I thought, and told him what had just happened to him by doing that. And so he, at that point, decided, I think himself, to just let it cool off for a while. And he was probably praying daily that the lady would die that owned it. But, it's I imagine anybody that's found anything or any chance of finding the big treasures hope that for the landowner, but somebody in the family's going to get it anyway. So it's never a good thing to go anywhere without permission, because you spend most of your time looking over your shoulder and worrying about what's coming up behind you. It's always better just to ask permission and just resolve yourself to the fact that if you don't get permission, come try again later, or try the husband instead of the wife or whatever, but don't push it, let it lie, and come back later and just remember what the spot is. I drive around with these spiraled index cards all the time, and it's just a flip deal for me, and I write down the places I've been and what I was after there, and what I found there. And so I can report back to those and find any treasure that I stopped on or couldn't get permission for, and go back and look at it again. It helps me pull my research back up. I got file cabinets for research.
That's a good point, Keith. And those escudos, gold escudos, are all numismatical pieces. I mean, they're worth a lot of money. And when I had that handful of escudos, you know what I would have done? I would have built a barn over the site. I would have built a barn.
Nobody can tell what's it for, yeah.
Yeah, nobody would have been curious. Just another barn out in the field, and now you're totally shielded. See, now you already know there's treasure in there worth getting out. So you could probably pay for the barn with just by selling one of those mosquitoes.
Yeah. Well, he called them mosquitoes. The guy that was telling me on the phone, he couldn't remember it was mosquitoes, and he said they were made in Spain or something like that. That his granddad found out about. When he took one of them to the coin shop and said it was worth pretty good money. It was gold. They wasn't sure it was even gold. It was just coins. And he called it mosquitoes. And I said, no, that's a scudos. Oh, yeah, that's it.
That's good.
He called them mosquitoes for I don't know how long, but gold mosquitoes.
There you go.
Anyway, it was funny talking to him, but still I warned him about what he's into now. He needs to back off of it and just not dig a hole anywhere, because those guys will be right behind you, whether you know it or not. So.
Yeah, it's again, discretion. It's one thing when you're out hunting coins. It's a whole different world when you're hunting something that could literally make you rich. Upon finding it. Now the whole world wants to get involved if you let them. So,
every magazine in the country's watched, and if you just put something in a magazine or cover a magazine, this big pile of gold that you found, you're asking for it. Somebody, IRS is one of them, but somebody either owned that land or owned it before is going to want part of it, and then the city's going to want. It's like those scouts that uncovered those that clay pot full of gold coins. What town was that in? I was thinking it was in Arkansas, but anyway, they were asked to clean a lot by the city that was in the city, and they didn't know who the landowner. They knew they were taxing for the land, but they couldn't find where the landowner lived, and never kept any records of where he left or something. But anyway, when they were cleaning a lot, somebody found that clay pot, and when they opened it up, it's full of gold coins. So the scouts are thinking, oh, boy, we got some money for the scouts, And then I'm sure there's some scouts saying, I want one of the coins to take home. But anyway, here comes the city. They said, well, we asked you all to go out there and clean it, even though the city didn't own the property. They wanted some of it. And then the owner come up then, and somehow it got to him, and now he wants it. And then the past owner of the property that sold it to him, they wanted some of it. It ended up the court decided to split it three ways, with the scouts getting the favorable part. But it was the only way to settle the situation, because you got a landowner and they found it on their land, but he wouldn't clean his property. So the city had to get people out there to clean the property, and so it's a good project for the scouts. Scouts were glad to come out there and do it, and they find it, So it's kind of a, everybody's got their hand in the pot, in other words, if you don't watch it when you recover something. Ain't no telling how many things I've said I recovered in my backyard. I own this one.
I was gonna say, Keith, your backyard has produced more treasure than probably any backyard in the United States. Well, listen, Mike has been saying that he wanted to keep start cutting the shows a little shorter. Mike, you want to jump in there and tell us if we're over time?
You guys are fine. We are already. You do whatever you want. If you guys are ready to wrap it up, we can wrap it up. If not, we can keep going.
Okay. Can we find out if there's anybody has any questions or anything they'd like us to address specifically?
Yeah, there you go. Does anybody in chat have questions or anything? Do you got anything you want to say? You want to criticize us and whatever?
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Probably want to know where that place is. Dorian said he'd give all the information to him for.
Yeah, how far is that from me?
Right.
Actually, Mike, you could get there in a 3 hours.
Really?
Just look on the map, look at San Angelo and find Abilene, and about halfway between them is a little town of Brant, Texas. And it's out there in the hills west of Brant.
Huh. I mean, I'm going to be really honest here with you. That the time that a project like that would take, I do not currently have.
And that's a consideration. If you're going to hunt treasure, are you really in a position to do it, or should you make plans, that might take you 2 or 3 years to get into the position to do it? And then you can start off with a lot better situation.
We do have a question real quick from Bill. Any KGC or other stories in Ohio they know of?
Absolutely, Bill. I don't know. I think I mentioned this, and we got a lot of laughs and comments out of it, but the KGC buried a considerable cache of gold, according to my information, in the corner of the Ohio State Capitol property, in one of the corners, in the yard, in the lawn. It's probably buried about 6 to 8 feet deep.
I remember you talking about that. We were talking about that one day. Okay, is there anything you know of that somebody could go after?
In Ohio?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get permission for that one. I think that one would be a little tough.
Okay. Let me, I have not specifically hunted KGC in Ohio. I've hunted Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Kentucky, and a few other states if I thought about. But here's what I would do if I wanted to hunt KGC in Ohio. I would study the geology, and I would find the areas in Ohio that are a little bit anomalous in terms of, is there a place where rock outcroppings rise up and it may be a popular tourist place, I don't know. But wherever there's geological anomalies, sunken areas, giant sinkholes. There was one in Mississippi that had KGC markers in it. Huge sinkhole. I mean, we're talking about, probably 500 acres in it. There's anywhere there is good limestone or sandstone rock outcroppings sticking out of the ground, I would go there and look for signs in the rocks. The other thing is a little tip, and I haven't checked the Ohio map on this, but if you find a town in any state called Center Point, let's see, what's the other one? Canton, a town named Canton. There's a Canton, Ohio. Now, the problem with Canton, Ohio is it's now a huge city. But if I would just about bet the house if you went to the oldest cemetery in Canton, Ohio, and studied the markers on the tombstones, you would find a Golden Circle monument tombstone. And as I mentioned originally when we talked Golden Circle, Golden Circle tombstones because the information is not correct. It can be as simple as the date of birth is older than the date of death. They reverse the two. Or it can be something in the name. Sometimes they would use, the names of Civil War generals. Sometimes there's one near Keith in your area. Keith, when you go out of Gilmer and you're headed north towards I-30.
Yeah. Pittsburgh, Mount Pleasant. Yeah.
Pittsburgh. Thank you. That's the one I was trying to remember. You get to Pittsburgh and you turn right on one of the main crossroads. I forget the number now. It's a Texas road. And you go out and there's the Bolton Cemetery. Colonel, I think it was John. I think his first name was John Bolton. Colonel Bolton had a big plantation. The plantation is long gone. There's rumors that he buried a treasure on the plantation. You go to his little cemetery where he's buried, and there's a monument, an obelisk, as I recall, was about 15 feet high. And there is a strange circle of numbers carved right into the obelisk that don't make any sense at all. And that's Golden Circle Code. Colonel Bolton was a member of the Golden Circle. At the end of the Civil War, he rode with Shelby into Mexico.
Yeah.
And anyway, that is the key. That is the starting place to the Bolton treasure. And I don't know how to interpret it. I've looked at it, and I've not been able to break that one. So anybody that's close enough to go there can see this for themselves. Again, go to the small towns, Center Point, let's see what Canton, if you find those. And there may be other variations of the word center, Centerville, center this. There's one little town. Where was that? Somewhere between the middle of Ohio, somewhere between Cincinnati and, say, Portsmouth, but up farther into the state. We came across a marker outside a little town that talked about the American Anti-Horse Thief Society, a historical marker. And that was one of the 5 secret Confederate organizations. So that right there told me that I was in a Golden Circle town. Now, I was passing through on a mission, didn't have time to stop, but I should have gone back and gone to the cemetery in that town because I bet I would find a Golden Circle tombstone. In Texas, Keith, down in your area, they like to take red sandstone or even red granite if they could get it, and put a marker in a little cemetery, a little out of the way cemetery, maybe down the dirt roads or whatever. And if you find that one red sandstone marker that stands out from all the other tombstones, that's also a beginning marker for a Golden Circle cache. They like to put caches near cemeteries. That will be the same in Ohio.
Yeah, it seems like now that you say that, I've seen something like that a little further south of us.
Well, try to jog your memory. You might want to go back there. Yeah.
Seems like we were hunting a place outside the cemetery gate that was what they call dinner on the ground, where they had tables nailed up between trees.
Yeah.
I remember correctly, and if I find the same spot, I'll go back and look, see what that says on the marker and stuff, see if I can tell it, and I'll let you know.
Well, Bill, I hope that was some help to you. Again, get out there and research, but if you can start to work those little town cemeteries, it will always be an obelisk marker. Almost always, except in the case of the red tombstones, they're pretty much regular looking little tombstones. Sometimes they're hand carved, like they're crude. Like they're designed to look a lot older than they really are. But the obelisk, it'll have the four-sided obelisk like a miniature of the Washington Monument. As far as I know, that's almost always the beginning marker for the Golden Circle treasures related to the cemeteries. There's one in the Canton, Texas cemetery. It's got the guy, and when you find it, you'll know it because he died before he was born.
Yeah.
It's deliberately got the birth and death dates reversed on it.
Well, I used to live there. I know where the cemetery is on that one. So,
Keith, did you know they fought a major battle through the streets of Canton?
No, I didn't. I missed that in the OR somewhere.
Well, that's because it's not in the ORs. It happened after the Civil War. Canton was such a hotbed for Golden Circle people. That's where Jefferson Davis snuck away to. They captured his double. They never captured Jefferson Davis. He came to Canton and walking barefoot beside a log wagon, hauling a big giant log. Inside that log was 3 safes that belonged to him. They buried him in a swamp that was dry due to a drought. They buried him 11 feet deep in a swamp right outside Canton on the east side. Don't know exactly where that is, but that's one I was going to work, and then circumstances in life took me away from Texas and never got to it. Anyway, Keith, it was such a hotbed of Golden Circle activity. 6,000 federal cavalry charged through the town, and they fought a hot battle all the way through the streets of Canton, and it was covered up and kept secret. Anybody that works that should be able to find the fired bullets. You know, they're not actually Civil War, they're post-Civil War artifacts, but still it'd be an interesting project.
Yeah, it would.
Okay, well, I guess that's about all I have. How about you?
That's good for me. I'm a little short on the Knights of the Golden Circle. You know more than I do about it. I need to read some more books, but I would, like I said, I might get with Hillbilly Bob and maybe go out with him and learn a lot with him. I bet in one day before you just found out you're a novelist at it. But I'll certainly be interested in doing that. So thank you for all the information on that.
Oh, well, thank you for the comments on the Spanish treasure signs. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was a good show, guys. I know I wasn't on the show, but boy, I sure was listening in and taking it all in, and of course keeping everybody busy in chat. But Bill's? I'm sorry, I was reading what Bill said. Yeah, okay. Well, we're ready to wrap it up then. If you guys are, it was a great show, Keith. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and I love having you on. Oh, good. And I'll be coming to see you soon. She's checking her schedule for next week, and when we know what it is, I'll let you know. I'd sure like to come over and spend a day with you. And
love to see you again.
Good. All right, guys. Hey, great show. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
You bet.
Good night.